Hello again, witches, seekers, and friends, and welcome to the Fat Feminist Witch podcast, the show where we do a little ranting, raving, and wand waving. I'm your host, Paige, and together we're going to explore magic and spirituality, social justice, the psychic realm, and most importantly, the magic of All Hallows Eve. Hello, friends, and thank you so much for tuning in to the show. For today's episode, we are going back to a Victorian Halloween tradition: love divinations and apple magic. So, even though All Hallows Eve is purely spooky or candy focused these days, Victorian Halloween parties were all about sharing an apple bob with your crush, learning the identity of your future husband in a mirror at midnight, and holding lighthearted seances to get spiritual matchmaking advice. It was a night of love, revelry, and divination. Today we're going to talk about some of these fun traditions, the magic of those bobbing apples, and how to inject a little love into your spooky season. Yes, my friends, this is yet another love letter to Victorian Halloween. If you remember, I think it was my second Halloween episode was all about some of the Victorian traditions like seances and table tipping. So the Victorian obsession with mystery and the occult and the rise of, spiritual religions like Theosophy were a bit at odds with the heavily Protestant, uptight vibe of the day. But the great thing about Halloween, just like now, it was a day where people could let loose a little bit. They could embrace, the spookiness, the fun spookiness, nothing too devilish, as well as the magic of love. Love magic has always been the domain of women, so even though these parties served as a place to meet a lovely man, it was often girls and women who organized the parties and who created and took part in all of the games. And what's neat is that a century later, girls still getting together for slumber parties with amateur palm readings and, they go at the Ouija board while they play MASH to find out if they live in a dirty shack with their movie star boyfriend forever or whatever. This is where a lot of those slumber party games actually come from, and I never thought of it. I never realized the connection, and, I always kind of wondered, where do urban legends come from, though? They just come from people. There's not usually any sort of documentation that actually supports an urban legend, right? But what I learned is that this is even further proof that girls have always been spooky. Yeah, like young girls are just very spooky. And also that there is this undeniable connection between romance and the occult. Though sex, love, and magic, have been tied together for as long as humans have been around, there's a particular era of art and literature and social politics before the Victorian era that really solidified this connection in our minds and even in modern magic, this connection between romance and love and the occult. And that is called the Romantic era. I know, it's very literal. The period itself has some shifting dates, but it starts a little before the French Revolution and ends around the mid-1800s. Romanticism focused on emotion and love and art and aesthetic above all. It was very beautiful. But even things like tragedy and horror and grief were seen as beautiful expressions of emotion. So this is the time of poetry by writers like William Blake, Edgar Allan Poe, John Keats, Percy Shelley, who was the husband of the incredible writer Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein, and of course Lord Byron, right? You gotta have Lord Byron. Around this same time, mythology and magic regained some of the popularity that it had lost a bit during the Age of Enlightenment and the rise of science. And the movement really featured a deep love and respect of nature. Also this feeling of awe about nature. Nature was the most beautiful above all. Gods and goddesses from ancient Greece and Rome, super popular, as well as medieval legends. So stories of King Arthur and the Isle of Avalon and Merlin were huge. Even the devil himself and his power of temptation were very big themes around this time. And this is when you first kind of start seeing certain characters that had been categorized as evil suddenly get this new identity as tortured and misunderstood and artistic. Lucifer and Lilith are two such figures that, of course, have remained incredibly popular now. Our vision of Lucifer and Lilith comes from this romantic era. The reason Lucifer is this beautiful, shining angel, chiseled out of grade A man meat is because that's how he was seen and portrayed by the Romantics. That darkness inside him was born out of pain or rebellion. And, he cared about free will. He was protesting against God claiming too much control over us, the humans. He believed in free will and free love. Bless him. Lovely. Lilith was still a demoness, but she was more now like an enchantress. She was beautiful, tortured, melancholy, and fighting for her own free will and choice. Glamour and temptation, they really tied the romantic and the occult together. It's something they can share. Even the tarot echoes this idea. There is a connection between cards number 6, the Lovers, and number 15, the Devil. If you pull those out of your tarot deck right now, you'll probably notice in the art that there are some obvious common elements, right? You have these naked Adam and Eve figures that are standing in front of a celestial being. In the Lovers, this being is an angel. And in the Devil, it is obviously the devil. To some, this seems very black and white. One card is good and one is bad. One way of doing things is good and the other way of doing things is bad. But thinking in terms of romanticism, what we really have is polarity and therefore balance. Neither is good or bad. Both are just different sides of the same coin. So sometimes we make our choices based on devilish qualities or impulses like obsession and temptation and lust. And sometimes, we have an open line to divinity that guides us towards a different path. Just like in life in general. Some people live in a bright and shiny world blessed with happiness and abundance and many, many choices. And other people live somewhere darker, where they're forced to choose between a rock and a hard place, and so they do. The darkness and shadows around this time were seen as just as beautiful and deserving of art. The light was beautiful because the darkness existed there to remind us of what we lose if we lose the light. This polarity and this idea of balance, balancing light and dark, also exists in modern neo-paganism, the wheel of the year, the 8 holy days or Sabbats. Halloween, also known as Samhain, itself is across from Beltane on the wheel of the year. Beltane is May 1st, and this is a much different holiday from Halloween. It is spring, it is life, it is fertility, it is very sexy, and it is bright and shiny. Like the Devil and the Lovers, we have a lot of similarities that draw the link between them. So one thing that connects Samhain and Beltane is this concept of the veil between the worlds being thinner. Beltane and Halloween are thought of as liminal times. At Halloween, the worlds of the living and the dead, they cross over a bit, they bump into each other. While in May 1st, the worlds of humans and, mythical nature type creatures, so things like fairies and nature spirits, though we come into contact with each other then. Both holidays are celebrated with fire, with food, and with magic like divination because we have this access. They both have this very fun and this very whimsical energy that encourages you to explore things that you don't understand and to enjoy them versus being afraid or trying to make sense of them. There is a little element of conquering your fears with both of them. At Halloween, we do that with our scary costumes. At Beltane, there is a ritual of getting a running start and jumping over a large bonfire. When you come out on the other end, you can do that, you can do anything, and it's very good luck for the coming year. So there's this element of conquering our fear and exploring the unknown. And also, masks and costumes are very popular for both holidays in witchy circles. People love masks and costumes both days. I think it's, us just emulating this this other world that we're coming into contact with around this time. Halloween in my lifetime has not necessarily been celebrated as a romantic holiday, so a lot of this might sound weird. But I can't count the number of Halloween weddings that I see advertised and that I get invited to these days. Actually, just last year, some witchy friends of mine had a Halloween wedding. I got to make them a witchy broom for their wedding gift. So cool. It was so fun. But the spooky and the romantic really wound together perfectly at their wedding. My friend wore this gorgeous lacy white wedding gown, perfect, with a necklace of these big, diamond encrusted skulls. It was fake, but they were diamond encrusted skulls that were glittering. There was an ancestor altar, and I noticed a few pictures of couples and weddings on the altar. That's where those pictures had come from. There was purple and black everywhere. It was very sexy and luxurious. And they even served butternut squash soup. And as we learned last week in our pumpkin episode, squash is a symbol of love, abundance, and family. All the pieces coming together, right? So it's not like there is no romance on Halloween. And, more and more people are finding the romance and the joy in the kind of silly aspects of Halloween. Not only that, but ancestors are there. I bet for those who are in tune, they can feel that their weddings are, so much more full because all the ancestors are able to come into town, right? It's the holiday weekend. Another vein that runs through the romantic roots of Halloween is the apple. The romantic artists were enthralled with the stories of the fall of Lucifer, and then his tempting of Eve in the garden, which gets her and Adam expelled from paradise. They loved it. It was very, very popular. In the story of these first people, Adam and Eve, Eve is created from the rib of Adam to be his mate and to be subservient. Satan just likes to fuck with God in this story, I guess. And he tempts Eve to eat a fruit from the tree of knowledge, which God has told them is forbidden, to never eat from it. She then convinces Adam to do the same. In my lifetime, in the story, the fruit was always an apple. But the apple is not actually mentioned in any versions of the Bible. In the original version of the Hebrew Bible, the fruit is simply fruit. It is a hanging fruit that has seeds. It could be anything from apples to pomegranates, figs, peaches, or pears. And in art, it was painted and, represented in all these different ways. You can find tons of pictures of the Garden of Eden with a beautiful fig tree or pomegranates or peaches. The apple, as the definite fruit of knowledge, was solidified in Paradise Lost by John Milton. Big, long, beautiful poem about the entire story of Lucifer's hijinks. And this version of the story was incredibly popular with the Romantics, and they really held it up as a genuine parable. It really became part of their faith. Even Christian authors like C.S. Lewis, who wrote the Chronicles of Narnia, he was a huge, huge fan of this kind of version of the story and of the apple. In the Chronicles of Narnia, the magical fruit of life and knowledge and magic and everything is a silver apple. In the earlier parts of the story, a seed from the silver apple tree was brought back to our world, planted in the backyard of the family that those Pevensey children from the movies eventually descended from. And when the tree was old and it needed to come down, the wood was used to create that wardrobe that transported those kids to Narnia. And that was all thanks to this magical apple tree. And this was obviously a nod to, the Garden of Eden and to the story of the apple as something that offers freedom and in some ways choice. As for the Romantics, William Blake was the biggest Milton stan. I mean, he was obsessed. And he not only included the imagery in his poetry, but he painted the fuck out of the entire story. Big, red, juicy apples and all. He was a huge, huge, huge fan of Milton, although I feel like the entire era kind of was. To this day, apples are still, considered to be this mythical, magical fruit, the ultimate fruit. And witches, real witches, consider apples to be magically potent magical allies, often in the fields of things like lending energy for magic or divination, and of course, love spells. All parts of the apple tree are ruled by the planet Venus, and they align with the element of water. They represent magic, divinity, love, romance, and divination, as well as knowledge and ancient wisdom. The fruit is seen as something of a spiritual messenger, and there are a lot of different divinations, usually to do with love, that involve, nothing more than an apple and a paring knife. The wood of the apple tree is probably one of the most common woods used in magic wands, right alongside willow. Apple wood is also sweet to some animals. My rabbit loved sticks from apple and cherry trees to chew on. The chewing is healthy for their teeth in general. And I guess the wood, they can still get some of the vitamins and minerals that make apples good for us, but they don't contain the sugar that is bad for bunnies. So, I'm just saying, if you need to leave something for some sort of nature deities, apple sticks are actually really good. And of course, you've all heard that an apple a day keeps the doctor away, and this reflects the apple's magical ability to help with healing. In a lot of parts of the world, the apple is also considered the food of the dead. And apples are buried into graves to feed ancestors. And apple trees used to be fairly popular in some cemeteries so that the dead would never go hungry. Libations of apple ciders and beers and juices were very popular in death rituals throughout Europe. So around the time when they were honoring their dead, their ancestors, they would brew up their own apple cider with the apples that they grew themselves, and they would pour it over graves or over certain trees to, honor their dead and bring good fortune in the following year. Hopefully their family would be watching out for them. So yet again, we have this connection. You have this, beautiful, loving food of Venus, and it's also the food of the dead. This is why apples are still so popular at Halloween. We dip them in caramel or candy. We bake them into pies. I personally will put apples on any sandwich, and I regularly saute them with shallots and butter to go with dinner. I love it. I've been sipping hot apple cider all week. I've got a cup right here. The cold weather comes, and that comforting smell and taste of apples and cinnamon is like the first thing I reach toward to really warm me up. Plus, my mom always made sure that there were apples in the house around Halloween because they clean your teeth. And we were pigging out on candy, and kids are stupid and don't brush their teeth. So if you have kids, get yourself some apples. I know from experience that anxiety, fear, and depression can keep you from manifesting your most magical life on the best of days. And witches, these days are not the best. That's why, if you're struggling or feeling lost, I want you to consider reaching out to a professional licensed therapist through BetterHelp. Within 24 hours, they'll assess your needs and match you with a therapist that is specially trained to deal with everything from depression and anxiety to grief, conflicts at home, and even sexuality and gender across the spectrum. It's all online, so there's no awkward social distancing in the waiting room. You're in the comfort and safety of home. You can message your therapist anytime and schedule weekly audio or video chat sessions. The service is available worldwide. It's more affordable than in-person therapy, and they offer financial aid to those who need it. Lately, so many people have been reaching out that BetterHelp is actually recruiting more counselors in all 50 states right now. I want you to manifest the life of your dreams, starting today. As a listener, you can get 10% off your first month by visiting betterhelp.com/fatfeministwitch. Join over 1 million people taking charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/fatfeministwitch. Let's get back to our Victorian Halloween parties, because these pseudo spooky singles events featured apples in abundance. First, you could eat and drink them. This is a little obvious. But they were also included in lots of different games and rituals. Apple bobbing was really popular for a time, and the age of COVID is not the time to bring it back. Don't start sharing, the bathwater, but but few people actually know that this silly game to get your face wet was actually a divination ritual for Halloween parties. So apple bobbing involves, you put the apples in a big tub of water and everybody has to dunk their head in and try to get their apple without using their hands. In Europe, they went kind of a step further with the divination. It was really specific. Every unmarried person in the group would mark an apple with their initials, like they would, with a knife. And they would put them into the tub of water with some totally unmarked apples. Then everyone had to dunk their face in and try to take a bite out of or grab an apple with their teeth, with their hands behind their back. It's hilarious. If you've ever bobbed for apples, it's horrible and wonderful. It's like any other thing, like a dunk tank. It's horrible and wonderful. So in this European version, the players were fated to marry the person whose apple they had bobbed, So if you pull JT up out of there, you're going to be married to JT. And those with empty apples were destined to be lonely old hags. I love that. In the U.S., we didn't go quite so far. The U.S. version of this old game, the apples aren't marked. But the first one to grab an apple will be the first one to be married. And everyone who puts that apple that they've bobbed out of the tank under their pillow that night will dream of their soulmate. We love dream magic. Now, if dunking your perfectly coiffed hair into a tub of ice-cold water on Halloween sounds like it sucks, you could also tie those apples to strings and still have people try to catch them with their teeth, make sure they're just out of reach. That's pretty funny. One of the most popular and well-known apple divinations for Halloween is peeling an apple entirely in one long piece and then tossing the peel over your shoulder. Some things say the left shoulder, some say the right. I don't know if it matters. Go with what you feel. Then you look how it landed and look for initials in the shape of the peel. And this will predict your future spouse's first initial. Some would also hang the long peel over the door. And then the first man that walked through would have the same initials as their future husband. I like that one because they're not putting a lot of pressure on that actual guy. The seeds in the middle of the apple can also be counted and deciphered using any numerological associations, like the numbers in the tarot, or by sticking them to your face and again looking at which ones fall first. They're wet and they're very small. You always hear that apple seeds, they either contain cyanide or what have you. Cyanide comes from apple seeds. And so you don't want to eat apple seeds. And I actually looked into this because I was so curious. I was like, ooh, maybe apple seeds could be really cool in curses, right? Like a cursing an ex or, cursing that has to do with love or relationships. And I agree that they would. But the way that it works is that there's an enzyme in the apple seeds that when they get into your stomach and they mix with your stomach fluids, they release cyanide. So I think you could definitely use them in a curse type thing. If you wanted to poison someone with apple seeds, it's not really going to work. They would have to eat 200 seeds all completely crushed up. And I just can't imagine how you would get that into someone's body. And if they're any bigger than a teen, they'll probably need more than 200 seeds. So I'm just saying, you can't use apple seeds to poison anybody. Sorry. Another very popular divination tool on Halloween was the mirror, often lit only by candlelight. This is one that still pops up in different spooky and psychic versions at slumber parties. I personally think mirrors at night and in the dark are too scary. It's too scary for me. I will not look in the mirror in my dark bathroom in the middle of the night. I keep my eyes down when I go in there to pee and I'm washing my hands. Don't look in the mirror, Paige. Don't look. As a kid, I wouldn't play the games. I was not going to stand in front of a dark mirror and call for Bloody Mary or Candyman or any of those motherfuckers. I didn't want it. It's so funny when I think of it now, because it seems like, oh, you should have been into this. I also wouldn't play with a Ouija board. And it's like, oh, why wouldn't I do that? And then I remembered it's because it was all too real. And a lot of those people that played those games did not really believe in ghosts. I do believe in ghosts, and I believe that ghosts are kind of scary. So that solves that mystery. But actually, something I learned is that there have actually been instances where people, when they focus too long on their reflection in the mirror, especially in a darkened room or when there's dark corners in the reflection of the mirror, can cause hallucinations. It really messes with your eyes and your brain and that entire process of how we bring in information. It's very, very creepy to look at the mirror in the dark, I think. Which, of course, made it the perfect spooky game. The Victorian versions weren't quite as scary, because although you are standing in front of a dark mirror with nothing but a candle, that was just what light was back then. Also, the ritual was meant to predict love. You weren't waiting for some horrible ghoul to come out and scratch your eyes out like the 90s version. You were standing in front of the mirror and your love. Okay, so these rituals usually involved a girl standing alone or sitting with a candle, sometimes an apple, and a mirror. Sometimes at midnight, but always on Halloween. And you want kind of a big mirror. You know, you always see these full-length ones. As a kid, we always played it in the bathroom because they have very large mirrors, right? Now, she'd be looking into this mirror, and a vision of her love would appear over her shoulder or somewhere in the reflection. There were also a bunch of different versions, like, you know, in one, the girl has to be brushing her hair, and she has to brush it a certain number of times. In another one, a girl's sister has to be with her, or they have to keep their eyes closed for a certain amount of time. They have to chant certain names. You know, Bloody Mary in the scary versions was all about chanting her name either 3 or 13 times. And a lot of these love divinations involved saying little poems, little spells, little invocations, asking for, you know, a Halloween witch to tell you the name of your betrothed or to have his face appear over your shoulder. So very cute. One version I found, and I don't know if it's historical or if it was just something someone wrote, it involved the girl, you know, she cuts like a center slice horizontally through her apple. And what you have when you do that is this, well, a hole where the where the core is, right? But it's in the shape of a star. So you have this star-shaped opening in the middle of an apple slice, and the girl has to look into the mirror through the star-shaped opening to see the face of her true love. And that one might be my favorite. Now, witches played a lot of roles in Victorian Halloween. A lot of roles. If you look at all of the Halloween cards, you'll see witches all over them. Some are these, you know, these wonderful old crones on their brooms with their cat, and they're beautiful and spooky and scary, and I love it. But others, you gotta watch out for those evil witches, because they're disguised as beautiful, tempting maidens looking to lure the lusty boys away to be used in their stews and spells. This has to be my favorite version. The witch is, of course, as always, the ultimate temptress and scapegoat. And also incredibly beautiful witches that were obviously designed for girls to look at as a source of inspiration. Like, all of these really beautiful witches, a lot of them are really funny because they look more like what women consider to be cool or powerful or sexy, and not necessarily always men. No one can deny the scary and sexy allure of the witch. In the Victorian era, dreams were believed to be prophetic on Halloween night, right? Since this is the one time when all of that spooky stuff is allowed. The veil between the worlds is thin, and so making dream pillows and sachets, putting dried herbs under the pillow or the mattress, you know, saving the apples and the sweets from the party to try to influence dreams, and even reciting poems into the mirror before falling asleep were all super, super popular. In Ireland, where people were very devoted to tales of fairies, the Fae, it was believed that fairies would come a-calling trying to get your attention, and possibly lead you away forever or kidnap you or something. And to keep your eyes closed tight until sunrise. Horrifying. Ireland, Scotland, and England really know how to scare people with scary spirits and stories, let me tell you. What's really funny about that is at Beltane, those same people were dancing and fornicating in the woods with those same fairies. They're probably trying to block out by keeping their eyes tight shut. Such is the way. Dream magic is one of my favorite, little categories of magic for some reason. I think I just love the connection between the world of dreams and magic and spiritual beings. Like, I love that those worlds interact. And I remember as a kid, on the night of Halloween, before I, went to bed, I would put a little piece of candy under my pillow. And I never knew why. It was just like something I did. Like, I just saved it under there. And I wonder now if this was like a little bit of kid magic, right? Kids just do things. Or maybe it was my way of expressing gratitude for Halloween, which is my favorite day of the whole year. I don't know. But as I was researching, I remembered that. It was a funny thing I remembered. And I couldn't even remember what I did with the candy after. I probably ate it, which is not good if it's supposed to be some sort of offering or sacrifice. But so as you can see, the romantic roots of the Halloween tree go so deep, it is no wonder it's become a time for weddings and engagements and expressions of love. Not to mention hookups. There's nothing like a Halloween hookup or makeout session in whatever full slutty pirate garb to remind you that Beltane is only one winter away, right across the wheel. So you might as well reach out and pluck that juicy apple while you can. Before we finish up today, I can't really stop thinking about how interesting it is, the similarities between these Halloween divination games and the games that I played at some slumber parties and sleepovers, like literally a full century later. What is it about preteen girls that makes them spooky? What makes us want to bond with each other over the supernatural? I didn't play these games much, right? I'm a scaredy cat, as I said. I really don't love being embarrassed in front of groups. Some people can take that gracefully. I'm not that person. But at the time, I was into Wicca and witchcraft. And me and my best friend, we were so cute. We would definitely wear little pentagrams and we would write in our books of shadows and we would, help each other decipher dreams and call each other on the full moon. I still have some witchy things she gave me on my altar. We watched witchy TV shows and scary movies. Neither of us could sleep after, right? Nightmares. But we spent so much time bonding over the supernatural and the things that were scary. This is something I've always thought was really neat, especially when I found out that, all kids are like that, right? And a theory I've heard many times, and that I think is very interesting, is that this interest in magic and the supernatural is one of the ways that young women, and I mean young people of all genders, but statistically it's more young women and girls. It's a way that they try to grab onto power. Since they live in a world where they don't really have any women and girls, and just children in general, have really been more property than person in the history of humanity. You can still meet people who really, it seems like they feel like their kid is their property, their thing versus a person. I'm not a parent though, so I don't know how that works. But those preteen years are wild, right? They're marked with rebellious and impulsive tendencies and hormones and whatever, and a desire to start being your own person. Like you're so ready to just be your own person. Not ready to live alone. Not ready to actually be on your own. But so many kids that age, between like 11 and 13, 14, they are so grown up. They're way too mature for this. But that's because to be grown up is to have power and, to have some authority. And they don't really have that as a teen. In the words of Eric Foreman from that 70s show, you're too old to trick or treat and too young to die. It's an odd age. Now, if we lived in the Victorian era, the only thing that a lot of girls did in their entire lifetimes, the only thing they were ever raised to care about, was to get married. And it was still not uncommon to have no choice in when or even to whom for a lot of girls at that time. So maybe, these Halloween divinations were a way of taking back some of that control. Or maybe every teen girl is actually a witch whose intuition is kicking in with their hormones and they have a wide open third eye. Especially on All Hallows Eve when the veil is thin and everybody gets a little more in tune with the spooky and the supernatural. Just something to think about. So I hope you all have a wonderful Halloween weekend, my witchy friends. There's no better time to cast some love magic or peer into your romantic future than a Halloween night with a full blue moon in the sensuous Venetian sign of Taurus. How beautiful is that? I'm so excited. A blue moon means that it's the second full moon in a single calendar month. How exciting is it to have a full moon on Halloween? The last time that happened, it was 1944. Looked it up, and it was not the second moon. I am hoping that that is either an auspicious omen or will at least explain why it feels so weird. Either way, it's a great time to enjoy yourself, to revel in sensuous delights, like eating a whole box of tiny, delicious little chocolate bars. It's the perfect time! To learn more about me or the Fat Feminist Witch podcast, check out my website at thefatfeministwitch.com or find me on Twitter, Instagram, or Facebook. To support the show, you can, of course, buy my books Green Witchcraft and The Grimoire Journal. Both books are written for witches of all skill levels to help you begin a relationship with the planet, deepen the one you have, and craft a very personal, magical practice. You can get signed copies from my Store Envy shop, the link to which is in the description for the podcast. If you want to make a donation to the show, you can go to my website and click Buy Me a Coffee, or join my private monthly membership group at patreon.com/thefatfeministwitch. If you have a witchy product, service, or publication, and you want to reach a magical audience, you can advertise here on the show. Just go to advertisecast.com/thefatfeministwitch to get started.